Hello dear friends. Yeah, I hope you're all doing well. I've just decided today that I'm going to do something with this little heart that I found. I'm going to just upcycle it. So let me just start with the heart. It's quite a nice thick wooden heart, and generally the paint itself is not too bad. I'm going to be using napkins to decoupage on here, so I'm not worried too much about painting the background color again, but I don't want this wording to show through, so I'm going to just gently sand this off, and depending on what the sanding looks like when I'm finished, I might need to put a coat of paint on. So I could use this, which is a primer and an undercoat. It's actually rather a nice paint because it saves quite a lot of work. Or I could use a chalk paint, and you can get many different brands with that. And then once I've stuck things on, I'm going to use the furniture wax just to go over it as a layer of protection. So I think let's just start with the sanding, shall we? So I'm going to remove the string first, just so that I don't sand that. And I'm just going to use the sanding block just in circular motions just to go over this. I won't talk while I'm doing this because it makes a little bit of noise, and you'll pick up on that. See that this is starting to sand off quite easily, and at this point you might be asking yourself, why didn't I just paint over it? Well, sanding off the words is going to make it easy. I'll be able to apply just one coat of paint, whereas if I wanted to just paint over this, I'd probably have to apply two, possibly even three, because it's quite a dark color. So that's why I'm doing this. Gosh, that's come out nicely, and it hasn't actually taken off a lot of the paint, so I think I'm not even going to paint this. But if you were needing to paint it because your layer of paint was thin or your wood was showing through, I would use one of the paints that I showed you earlier. So I'm just going to clean up all this dust quickly so I don't get that when I'm working with my podge. So now I've reached the time where I must make some decisions about what I'm going to use on this heart. So I have selected two napkins which I am really quite fond of, and I think, as you most know, napkins will normally have four of the same images, or maybe just a mirror image of the same thing. So I have a lot of options here of things that I could use. If I was to put this onto my napkin as a whole, I'd get lots of little bits and pieces, perhaps not quite in the arrangement that I want. So if I was to use this, I think I'm going to tear it up. This one, I'm also really fond of the little bird. It's something that I picked up in South Africa. We had a well, I had a shop, and I used to buy napkins in bulk, and then I'd sell them off singly, and this was just one of the packs that I sold. I'm really fond of that little bird as well, but when I'm laying this over the heart, just to try and see how the bird would lie, if I kind of use my hands to fold over the edges, that's what I'm going to be getting, is that image. I can add to it by tearing off maybe some more flowers and adding on, so that is the section option. But I think my heart is lying with the first one that I did, well, the first one that I showed you, this, just because I like it's lovely, it's bright and it's fresh. And so I think what I'm going to do now is separate the backing layers, because you'll know if you do decoupage that there's several layers to a napkin. And I'll separate these so that I just have the top layer, and they come away quite easily, but you just have to be slightly gentle with them so that you don't tear what remains. I normally keep the back pieces of napkin, which I just call a shadow print, and when I'm doing junk journaling and things like that, you've got these soft images which are quite nice to put onto a book page, just to break up the surface and add another layer. So although you're not seeing the whole image like that, if I had to put that on a book page, it would be rather nice. Let me just find a page for you to show you. So for argument's sake, if I had a book page like that and I stuck some of this down, you would see that it just breaks up the surface with a few little marks. This one hasn't got as many marks showing as some of the other napkins, but that doesn't matter. All right, so I'm going to now separate this section, and I'm just taking out a quarter. I'm just tearing it. You could paint a little stripe of water, that would soften the edges, and then you could tear along that quite easily. But because I have quite clear lines here and there's no design overlapping, I can just quite happily do this with my fingers. Okay, so I'm just going to continue to the end with that. So I've got my quarter that I have separated, and now I'm just gently going to loosen some of the images that I have. I quite like that image there. I might want to use that card postal somewhere else, so let me gently separate that. And this is the joy of using napkins, is that they're really easy to work with, quite forgiving in many instances, and because you can tear them so easily without having to spend hours fussy cutting things, you're able to reposition elements of the design so that you can create something that's new and quite different. Okay, so you want to lay these out somewhere where you can easily reach them, but where you're not going to get them stuck in the glues and things that we'll be using in a minute. So there's a separation here between these flowers. I'm just going to loosen that up, and it's not serious if it's not perfect, you know, you can quite happily work around it. You've got the rest of the napkin that you can use if you make a mistake. So here, the little leaf here goes over that word. I'm just going to move up to the next leaf up and tear it there. Lovely fresh colors these. If you live in the UK and you're looking for somewhere where that you can buy napkins separately, I do get stuff from the napkin shop, and they've just got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different designs that you can choose from, and you buy them singly, and they're fairly inexpensive. Because this was a cut edge here and there's a little bit of white in between, I'm just tearing that so that the design doesn't look really hard, and it breaks it up a little bit. And let's have a go at separating this slot on the side. We're still having a lot of heat this summer. It's been a very hot, dry summer. In fact, we haven't had a lot of rain for a long time, which is concerning. And I know that up in north in Yorkshire that they have already introduced some hosepipe bans. So I came out of 4 years of drought in South Africa where we were only allowed 1 20-litre bucket of water per person per day, which was quite harsh because that was for cooking, or it was for washing your clothes, it was for washing yourself, and any other things that you needed to do. We weren't allowed to wash windows, cars, we weren't allowed to water our gardens, so everything was pretty dead. And there used to be a spring up on the mountain, and we used to go and get water. It was little known at the beginning of the drought, but the word soon spread and became a nightmare to try and get the extra that we wanted, because that was just lovely to have as a bonus. Anyway, it needed to be shared. So on arriving in the UK, I thought to myself, oh, okay, we are going to have plenty of water, but we've had 2 years. The first year I arrived was really hot, and this year is too. So here again, this little flower overlaps the printed text. I'm going to tear just through there and under the little bird. Anyway, you can make a plan, and one of the things that's happened this year, which has been really interesting, is that we've already harvested the first lot of our crops. Quite a lot of what we planted earlier on is over and done with. Sunflowers that we normally just take down and get the seeds from towards the end of July, beginning of August. A lot of those are over, except for the ones that we planted later. So it's really interesting, but it has given us already a full crop of potatoes. We had lovely potatoes that we harvested. We've done lots of broad beans. We've had all sorts of other herbs and things like that. So we've got the second lot of things going in now. Runner beans coming with the second lot just planted in. So I think we'll probably get 3 crops out of our summer season this year. One of the things that has been a real excitement for my trainees, because those of you who don't know, I work with special needs adults teaching them horticulture, and we planted some seeds from a huge big pumpkin that my granddaughter got last October, and we already have some massive pumpkins, and we even have what I've called a Siamese twin pumpkin, because it's one stem with 2 little pumpkins that are co-joined on it, and that's going to be quite interesting to watch grow. So yeah, I think we're in for quite a different kind of season, but it's going to be good nevertheless. So we've reached the point now where we've separated most of our napkin. You can just gently go around any little edges that you might have, and I do recommend just being a little bit cautious when you're tearing things, not to throw away too much, because sometimes you just need that little bit that ended up in the bin. Right, so I've got all these elements, and now it's a question of just deciding where they actually need to go. Okay, we're ready to start sticking, and I have done a rough layout of how I think this would blend nicely together. Sometimes when you're doing this, you have to layer one thing on top of the other, so let me just deconstruct this a little bit. If I just take these off, you'll see that if I had laid this down on its own, I'd have had a big gap, so I decided to separate that little flower and pop that on. But I've got too much here, so I'm just going to gently tear off that last flower. Okay, so that will be my rough layout like that, and because the napkins are so transparent, you're not really going to see that overlapping. I did like this in the corner, and I was careful to be able to get the leaf right at the top and a little bit of that purple, because I love the pansies and I didn't want there just to be one sort of purple dot or in this all together. This little flower that I have torn off, I could quite easily tuck in here, or even overlap that on this section and then put that one over it like that. I might need to just tear a little bit off, but anyway, that's roughly how it will go. And then I have this with a stamp, which I quite liked. Now I could have actually chosen to go with a heart image here, but I just felt I've got too many small little birds and a different kind of color that I'm introducing, so I've left that. And this lovely image which has the little birds on the watering can just didn't really fit with the branches and things that I've got. Wanted to keep it fairly simple, so I'm just going to use that, and I'll stick that on last. Now when you're doing this kind of stuff, if you find that you might forget where you want things to be, lay it out roughly like this on your blank and then just take a photograph of it. That's the easiest thing. So to stick things down, I'm going to use some of my matte medium, and because I had this laying on the side, I've got a little bit here in my lid which actually makes life a little bit easier. I've got a Taklon brush, which is a very soft bristled brush, which is very fine, and in order to preserve your brushes, it's always a good idea to wet them in water. This means that it's wet right up to the top, because you know how brushes tend to sort of get hard up at the end. That will prevent that from happening. So wet it and then dry it, and then just slowly start to take your elements off, because you're going to want to stick these down one at a time. So that one will come on a little bit later, and I need to work with those two first. I don't put glue underneath because this is such a thin napkin that I'm just going to actually paint it straight over. So I'm going to hold this in position with one finger, keeping my brush wet all the time. I'm just going to blend this onto the surface. I'm not going to fold it over the edge. I'm going to leave it sticking out, and then a little bit later on I could come in and just sand what I don't need off. I'm going to reposition that so I get the benefit of the whole flower. And when you're using a nice soft brush and it's wet, you'll find that you don't get a lot of wrinkles. Start from the inside, in the middle, and then work outwards. That's brilliant. So the next one I'm going to do now will be just little birds on the edge here. I don't really want that stem going over his head. I might just angle it ever so slightly. That's a bit better. Right, so I'm going to start to brush this down. Get your first couple of strokes down fairly quickly. I have gone over the hole there, but that's okay because it's soft and I'll be able to make that hole visible again. If you get any wrinkles, leave them. Don't try and overwork them because you're likely to tear your napkins. Now I'm going to put this down. I really do want that little leaf on the edge, so I'm just going to get that in position like that. There we go. And working top to bottom, quick, quick, quick. Get that on as fast as possible. You could use Mod Podge to do this. You could use a liquid gel medium. Some of the gel mediums tend to be slightly thicker, which is why I haven't opted for them. But Mod Podge would also work. I just prefer the matte medium because it's not quite as sticky as Mod Podge. Right, so I'm going to stick my little pansies on next. Get those down, and you can see once you start, it's actually quite a quick project. If you don't have butterfingers like me, oopsie. Just be gentle if things roll over. You will get them undone. Just be gentle. Paper does stretch slightly when it gets wet, so sometimes you might find that that's part of the problem. But don't worry about it. Right, and then the last element that I'm going to stick on will be this. So I'm going to position this just into that gap and then put some more matte medium onto my brush. Brush it to the edge. Brush this to the edge. And now I want to smooth out any thick areas of matte medium that I might have, and just make sure that I don't have any sort of ridges. You want to go in at this point, you want to go in and fiddle and smooth things out. Leave it, because otherwise you're just going to damage what's already there. Make sure you're rinsing your brush, and we're going to leave this to dry 100% before we finish. I don't recommend that you actually use a hairdryer on this because it does tend to make the products wrinkle a little bit. So just leave it to dry naturally, and then we'll come back and sort out the edges and finish the whole thing off. So if we look at this lovely little heart we've got now, you'll see that I've got these little ends sticking off the edges. My napkins have dried, and the easiest way to remove these is not with a pair of scissors, but just to simply take a piece of sandpaper. You could even use an emery board, and just to gently rub down against those images. Paper will come away quite easily because it's so thin, and you don't really cause any damage to the design that you're doing. So just brushing downwards with the sandpaper, for want of a better description. And you'll see by doing that it actually gives you a really nice clean edge. I've got quite a defined sort of edge here where it's been sanded back. I'm going to leave it like that because it's almost as though it's creating a little bit of a shadow. So I just want to where the little purple flower is, just to soften that, and just round this side a little bit, maybe define this piece of wood a little bit more. So that's looking pretty good. I'm sure you'll agree with that. And now what I'm going to do is take some matte medium and paint a layer on the top so that that is sealed before I put the wax on. So I'm again going to wet my brush because it's obviously dried since I last used the matte medium, and I'm just gently going to go over the surface. This will make sure that it's nicely sealed, and when I come to put the wax on, that I'm not left with a shiny surface. It's a bit like putting this between two layers of contact paper, for want of a better description. Just adds a little bit more durability. You know, from time to time as you handle things, sometimes they get damaged, and this will protect the very, very thin layer of the napkin. I'm loving how this project has turned out. I'm really happy with the birds. So now that I've got matte medium onto the surface, the kind of thing that you're looking for here is not to have brush strokes running left to right or just straight up and down. I'm going to try and make my brush strokes curve with the natural shape of the blank that I've got underneath. And I'm going to make sure that these kind of lines here, where you can see these ridges where it's on thickly, are brushed down smoothly. So if to begin with, it means that you've got to paint the medium from side to side, and then you could go back up again to top to bottom or bottom to top, and then you could paint side to side again just to really smooth out the medium, make sure that it's evenly coated, and then you'll see these stripes that I'm talking about. I'm sure if I tilt this you can see the lines. So now as the last going over with the brush, I'm just going to use this very lightly in the natural line of the heart to get rid of all those lumps and bumps, and then once again leave it to dry. Okay, if you want to check, just tilt it to the side. The light will show you very clearly if you've got any thick areas, and then don't fiddle anymore. We'll come back to that once it's dry and put on the wax just to seal it properly. One of the ways that you can test whether your surface is completely dry is to just gently put your hand on it and make sure that it is feeling room temperature. If you have any little spots which actually feel cold to the touch, then generally you have a wet spot. Or if you're really uncertain and you're not sure that what I'm telling you is true, then go ahead and just actually leave it overnight if you're uncertain, especially when the weather gets colder and it's a bit damp. So now I'm going to take my chalk finish furniture wax. This is a light wax. I have a little bit here on my lid, and I'm just using some paper towel, and I am just gently going to rub this over the surface. I'm hoping that this will lift the color and that this will also just provide it with a nice matte finish. Look how nicely that is lifting the color already. So you can get these waxes in a whole variety of different colors, but I didn't want anything that had a sort of like a grungy or a vintagey look to it. I just wanted a clear one because I'm working with a white background. So I'm just gently going to apply this over the whole surface. This will be in place of putting a varnish on, and if you don't have clear wax, then by all means use a varnish. You want a nice clear decoupage varnish, and you get those both in matte and in gloss. And if you were working on something like a placemat or a coaster, you even get them that are heat resistant. Right, look how nicely the color of that has come up and given it a really nice finish. So I'm just going to leave that. That will take a little bit of time just to dry out, and then I'll put the thread through onto that. Back again, that piece of string that I took off. Okay, so this has had a little bit of time to dry. I'm going to use the back of my brush just to gently push the napkin into that hole. It's not going to show up as much. And then I'm going to re-thread this twine. I'll have to just twist the string so that it sits tightly so I can get it through the hole. There we go. And let's see if we can tie the knot again. Quite easy to do, and I must say that I am very thrilled at how that this has turned out. Thank you for joining me today on this little journey of upcycling this heart, and if you've enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to put the notification bell on, otherwise you won't know when I've posted a new video. And yeah, have a lovely weekend or a week ahead, depending on when you're watching this video, whether it's during the week or over the weekend. Bye for now.